My son and his wife locked my husband and me in the root cellar of the home we had paid for with 42 years of mortgages, shouting down the stairs, "It's ours now, old man! Sign it over or rot down there!" In the sour darkness, I felt my husband's trembling fingers find mine and heard him breathe against my ear, "Quiet, Ruth. They have no idea what's behind the fieldstone." When their car roared away, he pressed 2 stones in the foundation and swung open a small hidden panel, revealing the rusted green marine ammunition box he had hidden there decades ago, a secret he had never once shared with me in 42 years of marriage. Hello, my dears. If this story has already clawed at your heart the way it clawed at mine while I lived it, please subscribe to Her Side and stay with me. There are more nights I need to speak into the dark so they stop haunting me, and I would be so grateful to know you're listening. This house still remembers how to hold its breath. Every October, when the first hard frost silvered the corn stubble across the road, it would pull the air in tight, the floorboards shrinking just enough to make the old windows sigh in their frames. In April, when the redbuds exploded along the creek, it exhaled again, warm and slow, like a woman loosening her corset after church. I have lived inside that rhythm since 1980, the year Ronald Reagan got elected, and my husband David carried me over this threshold in his National Guard dress uniform. The farmhouse had belonged to David's parents. His father, Colonel Raymond Caldwell, built it solid in 1957. Thick limestone walls, a root cellar dug deep enough to ride out tornadoes, and a root cellar door so heavy 2 grown men had to lift it. He always said, "A man's home should outlast his enemies." That morning, I was frying bacon the way David still liked it, slow so the fat turned translucent and the edges curled like lace. He sat at the table in his wheelchair, staring at nothing, the stroke having stolen most of his words 3 years earlier. I hummed an old hymn under my breath the way I always did when the silence got too loud. "Still feeding him that grease, Ruth." Lydia's voice sliced across the kitchen like a cold wind under the door. My daughter-in-law stood there in yoga pants and one of my son's college sweatshirts, arms folded, lips painted the color of fresh blood. She never called me Mom. Only Ruth, sharp as a snapped icicle. I turned the burner down. Bacon settles his stomach. His stomach doesn't need settling, his arteries do. She opened the refrigerator, took out her green juice, and drank straight from the bottle. "Blake says the doctor told you to stop." Blake, my son, my only child, the boy I once carried on my hip through the county fair while David was stationed in Germany. The boy who used to beg me to read him the same tractor book until the spine split. That boy hadn't spoken to me without checking his phone for 5 years. They had moved in with us after David's stroke. At first, I was grateful. Blake worked remote for some agricultural tech firm. Lydia claimed she needed country air for her online Pilates business, and somebody had to lift David when he fell. We gave them the entire upstairs, 3 bedrooms, the big bath with the clawfoot tub, and the dormer windows that looked out over the back 40. David and I took the downstairs bedroom that used to be the sewing room. Little by little, the house forgot our names. Lydia replaced the gingham curtains I sewed in 1994 with gray linen that cost more per panel than my first month's salary teaching 3rd grade. Blake ripped out Mom's built-in china cabinet to install a wine fridge. They parked their matching Teslas where the old hay wagon used to sit, and every month another piece of us disappeared. Last Tuesday, she moved David's father's rocker, the one with the burn mark on the arm from when Colonel Caldwell fell asleep with a cigarette after Korea, out to the barn without asking. "It smells like mothballs and defeat," she said, dusting her hands. I found it at midnight under a tarp, stroked the worn wood like it might still remember the weight of a soldier's grief, and cried so hard I thought my ribs would crack. That afternoon, Blake came in from the barn office he had built in the loft, phone glued to his ear, laughing loud at someone else's joke. He ended the call, looked at the bacon cooling on paper towels, and sighed that I was an employee who kept bringing him decaf. "Mom, we need to talk." Lydia appeared behind him like a shadow learning new tricks. They sat across from me at the table that had fed 4 generations of Caldwells. Blake didn't even take off his ear pods. "With Dad's condition," he began, scrolling, "all the medical bills, the farm taxes, honestly, Mom, it would be easier for everyone if you and Dad signed the place over to me now, a quitclaim deed, avoid probate headaches later."
The air left my lungs the way it leaves a punctured tire, slow, hissing, impossible to stop. I set the spatula down. "This is our home, Blake. Your father's name is still on the deed beside mine." Lydia leaned forward, elbows on the oak I had oiled every Christmas for 42 years. "Ruth, let's be realistic. David can't even sign his name anymore, and you're getting forgetful." "I am not forgetful." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Blake finally looked up. His eyes were the exact blue of his father's the day we married, but colder than February creek water. "Mom, we're trying to protect you from yourself, from scammers, from ending up in some state facility when the money runs out." David wheeled himself in then, slow, halting, the rubber tires squeaking on the linoleum. He stopped beside me, reached for my hand with his good one. His grip was weak, but deliberate. Blake rolled his eyes. "Dad, come on." David's voice came out gravel scraped over rust. "Boy." One word, all he could manage, but it cracked across the kitchen like a rifle shot. Blake's face darkened. "Don't boy me. I've been handling the farm accounts for 2 years while you sit there drooling. This place is falling apart because you're too stubborn to admit you can't run it anymore." I stood. "Blake Raymond Caldwell, you will not speak to your father that way." He laughed, short and ugly. "Or what? You'll ground me? Newsflash, Mom. This is my house now. I'm the only one keeping the lights on." David squeezed my hand so hard I felt the bones grind. His eyes blazed with something I hadn't seen since the stroke. Pure, furious clarity. Blake stood so fast his chair toppled. "I'm done asking." He grabbed David's wheelchair handles. Lydia took my arm with fingers like iron. I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than she looked after all those Pilates classes. They dragged us through the mudroom, past the hooks that still held David's old service jacket, past the boot tray where Blake's tiny rubber boots once sat beside mine. The root cellar door stood open like a grave. The smell hit me first. Wet earth, potato rot, mouse nests, the cold breath of 1957. "Blake, stop this!" I screamed. He shoved David down the first 3 steps. The wheelchair tipped. I lunged to catch my husband and we tumbled together, my shoulder slamming against the stone wall, David's head knocking the railing. Pain exploded white behind my eyes. Lydia's voice floated down, sweet as poison. "You'll stay there until you sign. We'll even leave the pen." The heavy door slammed, the iron bar scraped into place, and darkness swallowed us whole. I don't know how long I lay there tasting blood and terror. Minutes? Hours? David's breathing was ragged. I crawled to him in the black, found his face, felt the knot rising on his temple. "David, talk to me." His whisper was barely air. "Ruth, wool, left corner, 2 stones." I felt my way along the foundation, fingers scraping over limestone cold as death. There, 2 stones jutted out a fraction further than the rest. I pushed. They moved. A section no wider than a cereal box swung inward on hidden hinges I never knew existed. Inside lay a marine ammunition box, green paint chipped, padlock long since rusted off. David had showed it to me only once, the week we married, then swore me to silence. For if the world ever ends, he had said, half joking. I dragged it out by feel. My fingers shook so hard I could barely open it. Inside, a manila envelope sealed with wax the color of dried blood, and a single brass key on a piece of rawhide. David's hand found mine again. "Read," he rasped. I tore the envelope, my eyes adjusted enough to make out the top sheet by the thin blade of light leaking under the door. It was a birth certificate. Name, David James Morrison. Born, March 12, 1954. Place, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary Hospital, Kansas. Mother, Elizabeth Morrison, deceased. Father, Captain Daniel Morrison, United States Army. Court-martialed 1953, executed 1955 for espionage. I read it twice, 3 times. The words refused to settle into meaning. The next document was an adoption decree dated 1956. David James Morrison, aged 2, adopted by Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Caldwell and wife Evelyn Caldwell. Name changed to David Raymond Caldwell. There was a letter in Colonel Caldwell's handwriting, blocky, military, no wasted motion. Son, if you are reading this, the worst has happened. Your real father was no traitor. He discovered something in Korea the Army wanted buried. Experiments on our own men. Chemical, worse than you can imagine. They framed him, staged the trial, shot him for asking questions. I was his XO. I swore on his grave I would keep you safe. I gave you my name, my home, my life. The Army still has eyes. Burn this if you never need it. If you do, use it. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National in Wichita. Everything is there. Live free, son. Make the name Caldwell mean honor again. I sat back on my heels. 42 years of marriage, 42 years of believing I knew the man I slept beside, and the floor had just dropped out from under every memory. Above us, the house creaked as Blake and Lydia walked overhead, laughing, music thumping. They thought they had won. They had no idea what they had just unlocked. I helped David up the stairs one agonizing step at a time. When the cellar door finally opened hours later, Blake stood silhouetted, smug, holding a legal pad and a pen like a conqueror offering terms. "Well," he sneered, "ready to act like adults?" David leaned on me, trembling, but his eyes burned. I looked at my son, the boy I had nursed through chicken pox, driven to every baseball practice, cried over when he left for college, and felt something inside me calcify. "Yes," I said calmly. "But first I need my phone. David's blood sugar is dropping. I have to call the ambulance." Blake rolled his eyes but tossed me his iPhone. One call, no tricks. I already knew the number. I had memorized it months ago when I saw an interview with a Kansas City attorney named Clara Whitmore, specialist in elder abuse and complex estates, former prosecutor, reputation for never losing. The phone rang twice. "Whitmore Law?" A crisp, no-nonsense voice. "Ms. Whitmore? This is Ruth Caldwell from near Abilene, Kansas. I need you. Now." I handed the phone back to Blake without another word. He glanced at the screen, saw the unknown number, shrugged, and slid it into his pocket. "Smart choice, Mom." They helped David to bed with fake tenderness, tucking blankets, fetching water, playing the dutiful children for an audience that wasn't there. I let them. Silence was my new weapon. In the days that followed, I became invisible. I cooked and cleaned. I changed David's sheets, all with the mechanical obedience of a woman whose spirit had already left the building. They relaxed. They stopped locking their bedroom door when they talked money. They assumed the fight had leaked out of me down in the dark. One morning, while I scrubbed their marble countertop, Lydia scrolled design blogs on her laptop and announced, "Once the old people are settled at Golden Acres, we'll knock out that wall between the dining room and the study. Open concept, farmhouse chic but elevated." Blake grunted approval. "And the root cellar can be a wine cave. Temperature's already perfect." I kept scrubbing. Inside, the ice in my chest grew thicker. That night, I sat beside David's bed and read him the Colonel's letter aloud. His eyes filled with tears, the first I had seen since the stroke. When I finished, he squeezed my hand twice, our old signal. "I love you, I'm still here." The next week, I told Blake I needed to drive into Abilene for David's heart medication. Lydia pressed $200 into my palm like a tip for the help. "Don't dawdle, Ruth. The cleaning service comes at 2. I drove straight to Clara Whitmore's office instead. Clara was taller than I expected, late 40s, red hair pulled back tight, eyes that looked like they had cataloged every kind of human cruelty and still found room for compassion. I laid the ammunition box on her desk like a confession.
She read every page without interruption. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from professional to something almost reverent. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said quietly, "do you have any idea what you're holding?" "Trouble," I answered. "Power," she corrected. "Pure, unfiltered leverage. Your son's entire identity, his business network, his social standing in Kansas ag circles, rests on being a Caldwell, a real one. If this ever surfaces," she tapped the birth certificate, "he becomes the grandson of a man officially executed for treason during the Cold War. Doors will slam so fast he'll lose fingers." I swallowed. "I don't want to destroy him." Clara's eyes softened. "Then what do you want?" I thought of the root cellar, of David's bruised temple, of 42 years measured in bacon grease and hospital bills and swallowed pride. "I want my house," I said. "And I want them gone." She nodded once. "Then let's be surgical." For the next 10 days, I lived a double life. By day, I was the docile old woman shuffling around in slippers, heating soup Lydia deemed paleo-friendly. By night, I emailed Clara scans from the public library, gathered decades of property tax records, dug up the original Caldwell family trust the Colonel had filed in 1972, naming me sole heir if David predeceased me, something Blake had never bothered to check. Clara discovered the quitclaim deed they planned to force me to sign had already been pre-filed at the courthouse, dated 3 days earlier, my signature forged so clumsily a child could spot it. The notary? Dead since 2019. On the 14th day, Clara called while Blake and Lydia were in Salina shopping for Italian tile. "It's ready, and Ruth, bring David. He needs to see this." Saturday morning, the doorbell rang at 9 sharp. Blake opened it in workout clothes, protein shaker in hand. Clara stood on the porch in a charcoal suit sharp enough to cut glass. Behind her, 2 deputies from the Dickinson County Sheriff's Office and a court clerk holding a clipboard. "Blake Raymond Caldwell," Clara asked. He blinked. "Yeah?" "You've been served." She handed him a thick packet. Notice of immediate eviction, temporary restraining order, and criminal referral for elder abuse, forgery, and unlawful imprisonment. You and your wife have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Blake's face went the color of spoiled milk. "This is my house." "No," Clara said pleasantly. "It belongs to Ruth and David Caldwell, always has. The document you filed last week has been voided as fraudulent, and this," she produced the ammunition box, "is about to become very public if you fight us." Lydia appeared behind him, hair still in curlers. "What is going on?" Blake tore open the packet, scanning pages. I watched the moment realization hit. when he saw the forged deed flagged, the sheriff's report detailing bruises on David's arms, consistent with being shoved downstairs. The medical report from the ER visit we made the day after the cellar, dated, photographed, filed. He looked up at me, standing quietly in the hallway beside David's wheelchair. "You did this?" His voice cracked like a teenager's.
I met his eyes. You locked your parents in a hole in the ground, Blake. Did you think we would just die there quietly? Lydia started screaming about lawyers, about suing for defamation. The deputies stepped forward. Clara raised one eyebrow. The screaming stopped. 72 hours later, the Teslas were gone. So were the gray curtains, the wine fridge, the Italian tile samples. They took what they could load into a U-Haul and disappeared. Word travels fast in farm country. By sundown Monday, half the county knew Blake Caldwell had tried to steal his parents' farm and lock them in the cellar like some gothic nightmare. His biggest investor called to cancel a $250,000 seed deal. Another texted that the country club membership was under review. David and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun bleed out across the wheat stubble. Fireflies rose from the grass like tiny lanterns. He reached for my hand. "Free," he whispered. First full sentence in 3 years. Autumn turned to winter. I turned the root cellar into my office. New lights, drywall, a long pine table where the potato bins used to be. I spend my days there now, cataloging 42 years of deeds, letters, photographs, writing my own story for the first time instead of just preserving everyone else's. Sometimes, I take the brass key from the ammunition box and drive to Wichita. The safe deposit box held more than I expected. Classified documents, a medal the Army never gave Daniel Morrison, a list of names of men who died so the truth would stay buried. One day I'll decide what to do with it all. For now, it waits. Blake sent one email 6 weeks after they left. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I didn't open it. Some doors, once closed, stay that way. David passed in February, peaceful in his sleep, the way the old soldiers pray to go. I buried him beside his father, under the cedar tree on the hill. At the funeral, the preacher read from Psalms. I read the colonel's letter instead. Half the congregation cried. Nobody mentioned Blake.
Spring came early this year. The redbuds are already blooming purple against the barn. I planted a new lilacs by the porch steps, the kind my mother grew. Every morning I drink coffee on the swing and listen to the house breathe again, slow and easy, the way it did when love still lived here. I am 71 years old. My hands are knotted with arthritis, my left hip clicks when I climb stairs, and I have never felt younger. The root cellar no longer smells of damp earth and despair. It smells of pine shelves and fresh paper and possibility. Down there I am writing a book. Not about betrayal, though there is plenty of that, but about what happens when a woman who spent her whole life holding everyone else up finally stands up herself. Sometimes, late at night, I still take out David's real birth certificate and trace the name Morrison with my fingertip. Blood doesn't make a family, I've learned. Choice does. And I choose me. The house exhales around me, warm and slow, like a woman loosening her corset after a long, hard day. I am home. And I am finally, completely, unapologetically free. If my story stirred something in you, anger, recognition, hope, please leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. And if you believe a woman can rebuild her life at any age, subscribe to her side. There are more stories waiting, and I can't tell them alone. Thank you for sitting with me in the dark until the light came back. Until next time, keep your roots deep and your heart fierce.